Greetings, Earthlings. So today we're going to talk about changing the input shaft seal on a BCS walk-behind tractor. I have here the transmission of a BCS walk-behind tractor. This is actually training off an old BCS 605. There are many BCS tractor models that you can change the seal the way I'm going to show you here, where the seal is accessed from where the engine came off of the transmission body. And I also will say that you don't have to have it all the way torn down like this. You don't have to have the wheels off, you don't have to have the handlebars off. You will have to take the engine off. The engine is typically held on by 6 nuts around these, onto this flange here. So you just take off the 6 nuts. If there's a battery box on there, you'll have to take that out of the way as well. Pull your engine off. You have to disconnect your throttle cable and your any kind of a safety shutdown cable you've got, or wiring harness for the kill switch. But anyway, once the engine is out of the way, the clutch comes with the engine, and you're going to be left with this hole right here. Now, I'll also preface this by saying this is on transmissions, or BCS models, I should say, that have the standard dry type clutch. This does not apply to any of the machines that have the power safe type clutch, which is BCS's wet clutch system. Totally different procedure for those. So this is for BCS tractors that have a dry clutch, and they have a seal that can be accessed by the front. The BCS models that this does not apply to would be older model 715, 725, 735, and some of your very early model 710, 720, 730, and 716s I should throw in there, that were made in the the late 90s, right after they introduced those models. This does apply to all of your BCS 605s, 737, 830s, 850s, 852, 853, 732, any of the later model 710, 716, 720, 730 that were manufactured anywhere from about 98 onward. But anyway, the input shaft seal is where this input shaft comes out of the transmission back in here, and Josh is providing his little pen light for us to see. So once you get the engine and clutch out of there, you'll see the input shaft, and you'll see what we call the clutch fork. This is the thing that the clutch cable hooks to on the top to move the clutch on the bottom. We need to get that out of the way as well. Now, that's very easy. You just pull this boot off the top and angle the clutch fork forward. Some of the clutch forks have a pulley attached to them. You can take the pulley off with one nut. This is an older model, it doesn't have the pulley, so you just slide this thing forward and take this out of the way. Now we can see, when we look down in here, I'm going to scrape some of the grime away. That's the oil seal that I'm touching right there. Right there is the oil seal. This is the oil seal. This is a new oil seal that hasn't been installed yet, so you can see the shape of it. It's about 7 millimeters thick, shoved into the transmission housing. The inner lip of a seal is made of rubber, so this is flexible in here. That's up against the shaft. The outside of an oil seal is kind of a rubber-coated metal ring that's a press fit into the transmission housing, so it's put in there with some force. So we have to pull that out. Craftsman used to make a little seal puller that was great for little dead-end areas like that where you couldn't get a traditional seal puller in there. Traditional seal puller has a hook on it and kind of a lever where you put it through a seal and sort of lever it to the side to pop the seal out. Well, that doesn't do us any good because we can't get it down into that hole. So Craftsman used to make a tool that would do that pretty well. They discontinued it, of course, because it worked too well. We can make ourselves a tool using an old flat-bladed screwdriver. This one actually had a broken tip on it, so I just ground a notch into the side of it. Now, even if it's a perfectly good screwdriver and didn't have a broken tip, you can still do the same thing. Using a handheld grinder, like a 4-inch angle grinder, you just grind a notch into the side of it. So what's going to happen down in there is I'm going to reach down in there, down in this hole, and I'm going to force the seal puller or my seal hook kind of through the interior flexible part of the seal. I'm going to force it in between the shaft and the seal. It's going to go through there and kind of drop down over there, and I'm going to twist it to the side to engage it like so against the seal, and then I'm going to jerk it and try to get it out of there. Now, I will say the screwdriver I chose for this, which I only chose because the tip broke off, and I'm like, oh, I'll make a seal puller out of that. This isn't quite long enough. I wish this was about, you know, about an inch or two longer, but it's acceptable. It gets right to the edge here. So I'm going to stick this down in here, jam it through the seal. Can't really see down in there very well. Give it a good twist and pull. And wiggle it around. I didn't get much movement there, but I'm gonna go to the other side and try the same thing. Kind of work it back and forth. All right, this one is being pretty stubborn, so I'm gonna get the heavy hitter here. I'm gonna leave this twisted in here a little bit, get a nice pry bar, and hook it behind here, and then I can really put the Hertz to it. This thing has been in here 100 years. This is an old BCS 605, as I mentioned, and this thing's probably close to 40 years old at this point. It is not happy about coming out of there. Okay, twist that. It is moving. I can see it coming out of the hole, but it is really slow. I keep going from left to right, so I can pull it out evenly. Obviously, if you try to put all the force on one side all the time, it's going to cock and jam itself in the hole even tighter. So we're just going back and forth. Yep. And there it is. So that one's obviously ruined now. So now if we're going to put the new one in, I'll reach down in there with a rag, kind of clean it out a little bit, you know, make sure there's no crap around there that maybe fell into the hole while I was monkeying with the seal. Looks okay. Now when you look down there with the seal removed, what you're actually looking at is the bearing and worm gear shaft that's right past the oil seal. So when you knock the new seal in, you don't want to go in too far, because if you shove this seal up against the end of that worm gear shaft is going to be rotating against the seal ring, and it's just going to burn it up. So essentially you don't want the outer ring of the seal in there any further than this surface right here. It can maybe go in a little more. When you look at a brand new one that's been installed from the factory, you can tell it's a little bit recessed past that surface, but not much, not much. And for safety's sake, you're better off just not driving it in there any further than that. So as far as installing the new one thing I like to do is apply a little lubricant to either the shaft or the inside of the seal, you know, because you don't want to put that on there dry. It's also a good idea to put some in the outside ring. Just gear oil is fine. You don't have to use any fancy spray like this, but make sure it's lubed up so it's not going in there dry and gets galled. Just carefully put this over the edge. Now, any oil seal, let me show you on the old one here, any oil seal has got a little spring around the inner lip of the seal, right there. And that spring kind of helps. Now the spring is destroyed because of course I just used that seal puller on it, but that spring helps kind of suck that inner lip onto the shaft to keep the oil from running out. The point is, if you just take a seal and shove it onto a shaft with wild abandon, you could fold this little lip back and actually dislodge the seal or the spring ring. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that that spring stays in place. So always gently put it over the shaft, kind of twist it in place a little bit, make sure it slides on there nicely. Push it all the way back until it bottoms out by hand. And then if you've got just the right size piece of pipe, and the piece of pipe has to have a large enough hole to obviously go over the shaft, but also just the right size that it's still driving firmly on the outside of this seal. Sorry about the phone ringing, but I have other people to answer that. So yeah, anyway, but if the pipe is too big and it fits like completely over the seal, obviously it's not going to do you any good driving the thing in. And you don't want it so thin a wall, like conduit is too thin. It's just going to cut into that rubber because the wall is so thin. This is actually probably a piece of like 3/4 inch plumbing pipe or something like that. But not everybody has an appropriate sized piece of pipe around. So you can use something like a 1/4 inch drive extension. This is for a 1/4 inch drive socket, like a socket extension. Or anything, even if you had just a piece of metal rod that was roughly this size. But the important thing here is that this end, whatever the end of the metal rod is large enough that it won't actually fit down in. Like this end could be a problem because I could get it like here and jam that seal in deeper than it needed to go. If the end is just slightly bigger, if your contacting end is slightly bigger than the outside width of that seal, then when it comes down flush in there, it's going to bottom out. The outer part of it is going to bottom out against that outer housing, and it's not going to let you go down too deep. And what you do with something like this is you just work your way around gently. So you would just put it, say start on the left side, tap it in a little bit, go to the right side, tap it in, go to the top, go to the bottom, and sort of work it in all the way around until it's bottomed out, until you're actually hitting that outside housing all the way around. And then the seal is evenly installed. I'm not going to do it in this transmission. This is an old parts transmission. There's no point in wasting a good seal on it because this thing is just going to be broken down anyway. But that's the procedure. Just tap it in gently until it's all the way bottomed out, and then you're ready to go. Now I will say on the old BCS models that I mentioned where you cannot change the seal from the front, those would be the model 715, 725, 735, and some of the very old 710, 716, 720, 730. Those seals are still replaceable, but you have to replace them from the inside of the transmission. Those seals are a much larger diameter seal, probably about like that, and they're actually installed from the inside of the transmission. To get to those, you have to take everything out of the transmission. Every last gear has to come out before you can get to that seal. Real pain in the neck. It's like a 3-hour job. And on those earlier models, if they're doing a little leaking at that front seal, frankly, the best thing to do is just let the transmission level run a little bit low and keep an eye on it and just run them. Because it's such a big job to get to that seal to change it. The fact is that the transmission oil level, there's a dipstick here, and as long as you keep that oil level just slightly below where that input shaft is, then the input shaft is not exposed, the actual seal, where the seal is not exposed to oil. There's all this transmission down here that can hold oil. So if you keep it just like at the bottom mark on the dipstick for those old tractors, if you do develop a leak, keep it at the bottom mark of the dipstick, keep an eye on it, don't let it run too low. The transmission will still be adequately lubricated and you won't have much leakage at the front seal at all because it's not underwater, as it were, or under oil. But with the newer models, you can replace the seals easily, and then you can keep the transmission to where it needs to be on the dipstick and not worry about it. Another thing I'll mention real quick, when you're replacing the seal, you'll probably notice that the transmission shaft moves all over the place. In fact, if I take an engine off of a brand new BCS 853, I'll grab the shaft and it'll wiggle all over the place. And you're like, whoa, what's the matter with this thing? The shaft is all loose. The bearings are ready to fall out. There's nothing wrong with it. The thing is, this end of the shaft is supported by the clutch. When you take the engine and clutch off, there's nothing supporting it anymore. That's why it flops all over the place. There's nothing wrong with the shaft. That bit of play there, that's not a problem at all. That's just the way it's designed because we've now taken away the support for this end of the shaft. So that's all. We've got the seals in stock if you need them. Thanks for watching.